The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I am very excited to announce that my one medium money playoff format league will advance to the semifinal round. Yes, survival. That's all we're doing right now at this point of the year. You survive, you try to get to the finals, and then you just hope that your guys don't rest more than the other guys. That's really all you can do once you get to finals week. But leading up to it, this is where we got to be the most cutthroat. And I survived. I'm in another head-to-head money league that for some reason starts way late. I can't figure that one out, but you can rest assured that I'll be doing this podcast hard until the very last day of the season because of it. So, side bonus, I guess. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everyone. I am Dan Besbris. It's Monday. We've got Reverse Chronological Lightning Round coming up. We got Streamin' Thoughts. The Besbris Long Stream, registered trademark, will be coming up probably early in the podcast, I would think. I'm guessing a lot of you folks that are in the head-to-head format probably most interested in how to stack your week. And I spent a lot of time on Sunday afternoon drawing up my calendar, took a giant piece of paper, folded it in half, and just drew out a massive calendar on it and wrote a bunch of teams and players. And here's the thing. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this stuff, the one preface I want to mention to you guys is that a lot of what I'm discussing from a streaming standpoint, I need you guys to look at your league and find out what players make sense. Because from a competitiveness standpoint, it's rather unlikely that everybody that's listening to this podcast have leagues that are the exact same size and level of competitiveness. Yes, at this point in the year, you're down to 4 teams in your standard playoff format, so obviously there aren't going to be that many pickups and drops. But, for instance, I'm in a 10-team league with a 16 roster. Okay, so it goes 160 deep. It actually plays a little bit more like a 12er, right? That's like a 12 by 14er, basically. And it's unlimited games, so every spot on your team matters. So it's relatively competitive, pretty deep, and you can't waste any roster spots. It's not a weekly league where the end of your bench doesn't matter all that much. This is a daily go nuts. So most of what I'm talking about is going to correspond to basically somewhere in the 160 to 180 deep range. Everybody inside that should be accounted for outside of guys that are surfacing or guys that are a bit more fringy where, teams are constantly looking for a little bit of upside. So when I talk about these streaming guys and I say, I streamed Langston Galloway in my league, you guys might be sitting there thinking, good God, man, Langston Galloway? Well, yeah, that's the guy that's available in my format. Everybody else on the Pistons is accounted for, except for Langston Galloway and Wayne Ellington. Those are the options if I wanted to stream a Piston last week. By the way, I did, and by the way, they were actually pretty good. Not the point. That's sidetrack 101. So, all that to say, just think about what it means to your league. So I'm going to mention all of the teams. And, I might mention a team like in Indiana, even though in my league, there's no one on that team that's worth streaming. Corey Joseph would be probably the closest, but everybody besides him is owned. Miles Turner, obviously. Darren Collison, obviously. Bojan Bogdanovic, obviously. Thad Young, obviously. Wes Matthews, yes. Domantas Sabonis, yes. I'm not streaming Tyreke Evans. He's outside. He's the top 200. He's outside the window. So when I'm talking about these teams, I basically would skip over Indiana for my particular situation, but I'm not going to do that. So that's why I need you guys to do a little bit of tweaking to understand how this corresponds to your own league. That's all. Other footnote here before we get started and dig into the streaming calendar, the Besbris Long Stream. That's right, I'm leaning into this joint now. And then the Reverse Chronological Lightning Round is massive thank you to everybody that's reached out about the blurbing positions open here at Hoop Ball. They continue to be open. We are taking applicants for I don't know how long. honestly, it's going to come down to we're taking applicants until every open spot is filled. Many of you have reached out. Some of you have sort of passed through the initial phases of how this thing goes, and you'll continue to work your way through the system. Just to rehash on this thing, it is a training position more than anything else. So for those of you, you need to have some sort of writing chops, but it doesn't have to be sports in any capacity. Basically, you need to have a pretty decent grasp of words. And I get it. That's a super simplistic way to put it. But, you can't come to us and say, teach me how to write. But what you can say is, teach me how to write for sports. I've written a paper on the War of 1812, so, I know how to write. I wrote a thesis on whatever. Here's what I've done. We don't need you to come in with 4 years of experience writing in fantasy sports. What we need is passion and some measure of mastery of the English language, where you got to have grammatically correct sentences, little stuff like that. Like, there's not going to be this initial, we're not going to teach you, high school grammar, basically. You got to come in with that. We'll teach you how to make it work for sports. Blurbing, as Brewski discussed on the Friday show, is all about how to interpret all of the news in the NBA universe and distill that into what's relevant for fantasy sports. It's awesome. It's going to make you, by the way, those of you that apply and make it through the hoops here, it's going to make you awesome at fantasy sports. Being able to monitor all of what's going on makes you better at this game. And if you're great at blurbing, and if you're dedicated and you make your shifts and everybody's impressed, then you graduate up the ladder. You start to write articles at Hoopball. You get exposure. You become a pro. Hit me up. That's the long and short of it. If you can write a little bit and you want to learn how to write sports and you want to break into the fantasy side, hit me up. Hit me up at Dan Besbris on Twitter. That's the way to do it. Easy enough. So reach out. Let's get into the real meat of this stuff, shall we? Let's get into the silliness. And the silliness is the Besbris long stream. So, recap. Going into the weekend, on Friday, Thursday shows of last week, we talked about what you should be doing to not only try to finish off last week strong, but also come into this week with a full head of steam. And that was basically trying to find guys that go 3 times Friday through Monday, meaning probably a game on Friday, probably a game on Monday, and then a game either on Saturday or Sunday in between. This is why I didn't really like the back-to-backs, the Atlantas, the Brooklyns that went back-to-back over the weekend, because they left you in a bad spot for the start of this week. What I did like was Chicago, we talked a lot about last week. Detroit, we talked a lot about last week. Miami, we talked a lot about last week. Believe it or not, the Pelicans actually made a lot of sense in that particular streaming fashion. I have a brutal schedule this week. They don't play between Wednesday and Sunday. The Knicks had a pretty good spot, and they go 4 times this week, so you could squat on that guy if you really wanted to. Phoenix, Portland, they had the 1-2 and then an off day before the game on Monday. So there were a lot of options. Washington, by the way, also fits in that. Spurs as well. There were a lot of options that fit into the mold of 3 games between Friday and Monday. So I'm hoping that means you guys went by those ideas and don't need to really make any moves today necessarily, unless you're doing some significant reboots on your stuff. And what does that even mean? It's hard for me to necessarily say, because I don't know what's going on in your league versus my league. What I would say on the reboot is the only reason I think you would want to make a move today, if you set yourself up for this week effectively, and that's a big if. If you didn't, then yeah, you might have to make a move today. Like if you're squatting on somebody, if you have a Magic player that went on Sunday but only goes 2 times this week, you might want to just bail out on them today. Memphis, they had a horrible last week. They don't play until Wednesday of this week. I don't see why you'd have one of them if you were planning on streaming that slot, you would have dumped them last week, but, just for sake of argument. Anyway, all of that being said, I'm going to assume going into this long stream discussion that you set yourself up for Monday, for tonight, or for, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, I guess, for Monday night, by having a whole bunch of guys that went 3 times between Friday and Monday. So hopefully you don't need to make any moves today. The only other reason, by the way, that you might need to make a move today would be, what if somebody really good or relatively good got dropped in your league because either A, they didn't play enough last week, like a Memphis Grizzly, actually, come to think of it. So, you wouldn't make that move today. You'd probably make it on Wednesday. But they got dropped last week because of a 2-game week. Maybe somebody who was dinged up and day-to-day might end up becoming relevant. So all of these things are little reasons that you might want to make a move today. But again, I think the best-case scenario here is you set yourself up. You got a really nice, thick card going tonight, Monday night. And then you can save a lot of your moves for Tuesday through the rest of the week. I believe pretty strongly, actually, that this week is a harder week to stream than last week. Last week was easy. You had a couple of teams that were super front-loaded. You had a bunch of teams that had a cluster of games in the middle of the week. You had a lot of teams that went 4 times in 6 days. That actually is not as common this week as it was last time around. There are a few of them, make no mistake, there are a few of them, but the problem is that a lot of the teams that do it don't have the kind of fringy fantasy guys that you'd want to stream. Like, for instance, the Rockets. They go Tuesday through Sunday, 4 games in 6 days. Most of the leagues that I'm in, and I don't know about you guys, I'm guessing it's somewhat similar, the only fringe Rocket guy that you could stream right now is Gerald Green? Nah. So that stinks. Whereas last week, you could argue that Detroit, going through the weekend, had 3 games in 4 days. That was a pretty good spot, and there are a couple of Detroit guys that were worth picking up. Cleveland and the Clippers at the start of last week had a back-to-back at the beginning. You could front-load your week with guys like Landry Shamet, Gilgeous-Alexander, fringy guys on the Cavaliers. Brandon Knight, oddly enough, ended up being somewhat useful. Ante Zizic was somewhat useful in those spots. And those are just they're not as prevalent this time around. Indiana has a back-to-back, and Golden State has a back-to-back to start this week. I don't know that there's a guy worth picking up on either of those teams that's not already owned for streaming purposes. So that's why I think this week is a little bit tougher. But from a long streaming perspective, here's what you want to look at. Monday and Wednesday are the busier 2 days this week. So double check your calendar to make sure you're not overloaded on either of those 2 nights. Like, before you make a move for tonight, make sure you even need to bother. And certainly make the same assessment well in advance on Wednesday. Make sure you don't need to add, or you do, make sure you do need to add someone for that day before you go and do it. For your ease of use, we'll break this down 2 different ways. Number 1, let's say you don't have any overloaded days. That would be beautiful. That would be, enviable, because I'm not in that position, but whatever, doesn't matter. This isn't about me. If you don't have any maxed out roster days, what you ought to do is look for teams with 3 games in 4 days to start the week. Because you could actually make some moves here early in the week to max out some games. The teams that have 3 games in 4 days to start the week are Dallas, Golden State, Indiana, Utah, and Washington. 5 teams go 3 times today through Thursday, which is a pretty good spot to be in, because you could make a move on Friday and have somebody going 2 games Friday through Sunday. Do the same thing we did last week. Try to get someone who goes maybe Friday, Saturday. Miami is in that spot. You could make a move again on Sunday if you wanted to. There is no one, by the way, at the end of this week that goes Sunday into Monday of next week. So you can't really front load your finals week the way we were able to do a little bit this week and then a whole lot last week. I'm looking at teams that go on the off-kilter days. For those of you that are dealing with a potential roster max out, Atlanta, Charlotte, Indiana, who we just mentioned, they just have a really good schedule to start the week, regardless of what spot you're in. Minnesota, Sacramento, and Golden State. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams play games on Tuesday and Thursday. That's actually not very many when you think about it. Only 6 out of the 30 teams go on Tuesday and Thursday together. So that's actually where I'm focusing a lot of my attention right now. I will probably be making one move on Tuesday to unload anyone on your team who doesn't play on either Tuesday or Wednesday. That's what you have to eliminate. Try to wipe out any streamers on your team that have 2 off days in between games. That's the way to go. The other day, and this one to me is actually even more interesting, is Thursday. Thursday is a fabulous day because a lot of teams go 2 times between Monday and Wednesday. I don't know that you can make up a ton of ground, really, this week, unless you're willing to part with some guys who have crummy schedules. Like Brooklyn, you only have a 2-gamer. Atlanta is a 3-gamer. Look at some of those. And if you have fringy guys, then that's where you're punting. Here's the thing, though. There aren't that many teams that had a really good schedule last week that have a really bad schedule this week. Brooklyn had a pretty good one. They had that weekend back-to-back, so you know you're getting off of your Nets assets to start this week. And a lot of the other teams that were kind of not great last week are just also not that great this week. Like Memphis had 2 games, and now they have 3. Miami, their schedule got better, went from 3 to 4, but we already talked about how they were a really good pickup on Wednesday of last week. And then a lot of the other teams are just like 3-3 or 3-2. Like if it was good, then it stayed okay. And if it wasn't that good, then it didn't change all that much. It's a really weird dynamic going on here where there weren't that many times where you might have had a guy who had a really good schedule last week that now floats into a really bad one. Right? It's pretty weird. Brooklyn's almost the only one where it was like, oh, yeah, I sat on that guy all week last week, and now they're just not worth using. The reason that I bring that up in this context is I don't know that you have to do a whole lot of wheeling and dealing, and the streamers that you're sitting on right now probably have a 4-game week coming up anyway. Right? Like if you did, what was I talking about over the weekend? If you picked up a Piston that went 3 times Friday through Monday, they have 4 games this week. Miami has 4 games this week. We were talking about all these teams that had good schedule. New York has 4 games this week. The Spurs have 4 games this week. All of these teams that we picked up over the weekend to front load this week have 4 games, with the exception of Phoenix and Portland, basically, who didn't have that many streaming options other than, you could argue, maybe Rodney Hood with the injury to C.J. McCollum. That changed the dynamic a little bit from the last time we talked. So it's easy for me to get off topic here when we're talking about long streaming because there's so many different kind of tendrils that can come off of this stuff. The reason that I bring all this up is if you're sitting on a streamer with 4 games this week, you don't want to make a bunch of moves right at the outset of the week because it's not actually going to gain you any games. If you have a Piston, well, I mean, talk about the Heat. There's literally nothing you can do that's going to improve your schedule from what Miami gives you here. They have 4 games in the first 6 days of this week. Your move, if you have a Heat, is to wait until Sunday. Detroit is a little bit of an interesting case because they have a game tonight, Monday night, then they go off 2 days, and then they actually have a really good schedule Thursday through Sunday. So if you have a Piston on your team that you were streaming, one could make the argument that you rotate into a team that has 4 games Tuesday through Sunday, and that would gain you 1 game this week. That's the only way to do it. You got to turn a 4-gamer into a 5-gamer. Otherwise, you're going to end up using all of your moves on 1 streaming slot, and we've talked about how little I care for that. Because that, friends, that's not a long stream. That's a regular stream, and this is the Besbris long stream. So, my best advice to you, friends, is if you front-loaded this week and you have a bunch of guys going today, check to see what your situation is for Wednesday. If you have open slots on Wednesday, Milwaukee goes Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Houston, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. Dallas, Wednesday, Thursday. Saturday, they also go today if you wanted to bail out on somebody else in the mix. Cool. And there are a lot of teams that just have 4 games this week, where if you really wanted to ride that one out, like if you picked up some Knicks, you could just ride them. They go 4 games. Same deal with the Spurs. Same deal with the Pistons. Same deal with the Heat. The Heat is my favorite, by the way, of all the teams that I just mentioned, because their week wraps up on Saturday. As I mentioned earlier, you could move one of them for a Sunday guy. Just use a move on Sunday, get 1 extra game. Easy. You ride your Heat all week. It's a very simple plan, and one of my favorites because on Sunday you'll know what stat you need the most. That's a pretty cool advantage to have. If you make your move on the latest day possible, you can target a statistic a lot easier, and a lot of teams play on Sunday. If you are maxed out on Wednesday, there are some teams that could still cut you through the mess a little bit. I mentioned them before. Charlotte is a good one. They go 4 games Tuesday through Sunday, and a couple of names have popped up out there. Marvin Williams has been slumping. So Miles Bridges has done a little bit more. Cody Zeller's been out, so maybe he's been dropped. If he comes back, he could be a guy you pick up. That's a team that has an interesting schedule Tuesday through the rest of the week. What if Derrick Rose is a go on Tuesday? Minnesota goes Tuesday, Thursday. Then you could make a move on Friday, or you could roll with them all the way until Saturday and then make a move on Sunday. Go with 2 moves on that one to maximize your games this week. It's not my favorite. But if somebody comes off the DL, so to speak, that's actually really good, it might be worth getting 2 to 3 games out of a guy that's a cut above someone else. Right? Like in that case, you're using 2 moves to turn a 4-game week into a 5-game week, but you're using 2 moves to take a 4-game top 140 guy. He gets 1 game, then you get 3 games out of a top 75 to top 80 guy, and then you get 1 more game out of a top 140 guy. So that's a lot more effective than just 4 games or 5 games out of a top 140 guy. Then you're weighing what kind of value are you actually getting out of a guy. So Minnesota goes Tuesday, Thursday. Sacramento, I don't know if they have any really good names worth grabbing. Golden State, same situation. So there are a few options out there. But as I stated a moment ago, if your team can hang on until after the overloaded Monday and Wednesday, and this is a problem that you're running up against, there are a bunch of teams that go Thursday and Sunday with another game in between, either Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Sunday, and it gives you a lot more options. I'll list them. Charlotte, Denver, Detroit, Golden State, Sacramento. Suddenly, you now have some new teams in the mix that we hadn't mentioned before that may have some fringy. Denver, for sure, has some guys you could stream. Someone probably dropped Gary Harris. You could pick some Pistons back up if you had them in a previous iteration. Monte Morris, Malik Beasley, Mason Plumlee. Denver's got a host of options. What if we find out Golden State is going to be resting somebody in their back-to-backs? We might have someone you could drop into the mix there. Kevon Looney, maybe, could be an interesting pickup. So I think that Thursday's probably your juiciest day of the week, but obviously you've got some options earlier in the frame as well, and we'll talk more about them tomorrow after we see how things go today. Reverse chronological lightning round. We'll do it a little bit quicker this time because we're already 25 minutes into the podcast, but you know how this thing goes, and this is where we're hunting for, at this point, really, guys that can be a big-time difference maker or streaming options. We'll start with Sunday. You know how this goes. Lakers, a beautiful tank job. Alex Caruso, by the way, playing his ass off right now. 12 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, 5 steals, and 3 blocks for the great Caruso. He deserves to be picked up and played if you're in a games cap format. He's that good right now. Lakers have a terrible schedule this week, so you're not streaming anybody on this team if you don't have to. They had their big push last week, and then they have a better schedule again. If you really wanted to, you could pick up a Laker on Friday of this week. They go Friday, Sunday, and then they have a back-to-back Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. That would give you 6 games over 10 days for the Lakers. It's not great. Not the end of the world. Your best time to pick one up would actually be Tuesday of next week, March 26th. So you're looking way down the line a little bit. Jonathan Williams, Mo Wagner both fell off a cliff as we figured when Kyle Kuzma came back. LeBron played 35 minutes in this game. It actually took LeBron basically dookying this game away down the stretch for the Lakers to pull off the tank. Well done, Los Angeles Lakers. This is how you move down in the standings. You lose games that you're leading by 11 with 2 minutes to go. I firmly believe they lost this game on purpose. There is nothing that you can say that would convince me otherwise. The Lakers now find themselves just a half game ahead of the Washington Wizards, who are foolishly still trying to play for a playoff spot. That's a team that they could easily fall behind. If the Lakers fall behind the Wizards and remain where they are in the Western Conference, that would mean that they would have the 9th pick. They're only 2 games ahead of the Pelicans, but the Pels are actually tanking even harder than the Lakers are right now. They're only 2.5 games ahead of the Mavericks, who accidentally won a game. The Grizzlies, they're only 3 games. So, Lakers, look out, man. LeBron wants that high pick. He's losing hard these days. For the Knickerbockers, no Dennis Smith Jr., so we got one of those weird Emmanuel Mudiay explosions, which is often followed by him shooting 3 for 15 from the field and 6 for 9 at the free throw line. But from a streaming standpoint, he makes a lot of sense. They have 4 games this week. If you need to bail out on someone who has a bad schedule, they're playing tonight. They go every other day for the week. Mario Hezonja pushed himself into the mix and becomes interesting with Noah Vonleh out with a right ankle injury. If we find out that that's anything remotely serious, he actually becomes a 9 category kind of guy. Big-time steals, rebounds. He can score. He's a great foul shooter. He sucks in a lot of aspects of basketball. He's very fantasy-friendly, but he can never carve out enough minutes because other guys are just better than him at too many things. But Noah Vonleh being out, that opens the door. Damian Dotson, he's a great streaming option as well, doing a ton of scoring right now, but not a lot of other stuff. Kevin Knox finally broke out of his slump and could even be a streaming option for a 4-game week. No, I'm not panicking on Mitchell Robinson. He just didn't look very good in this ball game, but he still got his 2 blocks. 4-game week, you're not doing anything silly in that respect. Shuffle along. Charlotte waxed by Miami, who finally figured it out. Took them all freaking year, but they finally figured it out. Play Hassan Whiteside for 20 minutes off the bench. Let him just go nuts. Use whatever energy he's got. Get a nice, decent lather going. Get his usage rate up. If he's feeling healthy and playing well, you can run him out to 22, 23 minutes. If he's looking slow and Bam's playing well, you flip it. You give Bam an extra couple minutes. And that's what happened in this ball game. Both fantasy relevant in this capacity because Whiteside is not getting to the free throw line that much. He's blocking more shots again off the bench. And that's the good news. The bad news is James Johnson made his return. Come on, Miami. This is going to put a big-time dent into Kelly Olynyk. I don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, but it's going to happen. Olynyk still played 31 minutes in this game while James Johnson's getting his legs underneath him, but at some point that's going to become a timeshare, and it's going to be super annoying. The Dwayne Wade farewell tour continued with 17-8. Goran Dragic had 19 points in 27 minutes. He and D. Wade both went nuts in the fourth quarter. And again, Miami just replete with streaming options for this week. This is part of a stretch for the Heat that started yesterday where they go 5 times in 7 days. Yes, there are rest candidates in there, D. Wade being one of them. But the Heat are the 8th seed right now. They're only a game up on the Magic. I don't know that you're seeing anybody take days off unless they clinch something in the next 3 or 4 days. So I wouldn't panic on it yet. And they got all sorts of streaming options on this team. Justice Winslow went down with an injury. He missed this one with a right thigh bruise. So Derek Jones Jr. got a start, and he posted some big-time defensive stats. Josh Richardson has been terrible. So they're looking for scoring elsewhere, which means you could even stream the likes of freaking Dion Waiters if you wanted to. From a 9-category perspective, if you're actually using games cap, I think I'd only use Bam Adebayo and Josh Richardson. I know it's tough to say after this shooting game, and maybe Kelly Olynyk right now. But if you're in stream mode, you can add Dragic, Wade, Waiters, Jones, Hassan for sure. A lot of names you can add to the list. Philly and Milwaukee. This one had a lot of fouling at the end of regulation, and it ran up the totals a little bit. Giannis, what a whopper. 52, 16, and 7. That's a comeback Sunday for a lot of teams. And Joel Embiid had the other big game of the day and then was promptly ruled out for the front end of Philly's back-to-back with Charlotte and Boston Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. So Joel Embiid's week just got cut down to a twofer. You got to start him because he's a top 20 guy. You can't dump it, but that's a big-time shot to the gut. You could stream Boban for one of those games if you wanted to, but I wouldn't use a weekly move on it. Maybe more of like a games cap thing. Do you need field goal percent, rebounds, and blocks? Run him out there for one night. Milwaukee side. We were wondering what would happen after the Malcolm Brogdon news. Brogdon, of course, being ruled out with a partial tear of the plantar fascia. He's out for 6 to 8 weeks. My initial thought would be that Niko Mirotic would be the beneficiary of this. They would just slide everybody down, put Bledsoe, or if Bledsoe was already the one, it doesn't matter. If Brogdon was the 2, Bledsoe was the 1, it doesn't matter. You shift Chris Middleton down to a guard spot, Giannis at the 3, dump Mirotic in there at the 4, and keep Brook Lopez at the 5. That would be the initial assessment, and that's what happened. He got the start, and he sucked. Because it's tough to try to figure out how you fit alongside Giannis, Middleton, Bledsoe, and Brook Lopez. Those are guys that are going to be ahead of you in the pecking order, at least at the outset here. I think overall this is good news for Mirotic. They may end up bringing him off the bench again. I don't know. But it's shots. When a key piece of a team goes down, their duties get split up a little bit. And with Giannis, Middleton, and Bledsoe already doing almost as much as they could, that means that someone else is going to have to take a little bit of the pie, and that logical guy would be Niko. So hang on tight. Milwaukee has a solid schedule this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday, and there's a very real chance that he has one pretty decent-sized game, and maybe he can even squeeze in another decent one in there as well. I'm not too excited about the other guys. You know, there was a thought that maybe George Hill would see a couple extra minutes if they went with extra guards. Pat Connaughton, nah, I'd rather just assume it's going to be Niko. Toronto lost in Detroit, and then Kawhi Leonard is expected to sit out an upcoming game for the Raptors. This load management stuff is just ridiculous. It's a back-to-back, Sunday and then Monday, so he's probably not going to play against the Knicks, and then you figure you can get 3 games out of him. And that means, honestly, I don't know. I don't know what that means, because Kyle Lowry is missing games with his ankle sprain, typical Kyle Lowry playoff stuff. Like I've said, I don't even draft him in head-to-head leagues anymore, because this happens every freaking year. No Serge Ibaka for one more game, so Marc Gasol will likely play well one more time. He saw big minutes in this one against Andre Drummond and had a nice, well-rounded line. With no Kawhi and no Kyle Lowry for this game on Monday, if that's indeed what's about to happen, you may see a lot of Freddie Van Fleet. Is it enough to warrant a pickup for 4 games if he was dropped? Maybe. I mean, all you really need is 1 whopper and then 3 okay ones, and you're all set. And if Kyle Lowry misses any more time, even after Kawhi comes back, you can get a really big week out of Freddie. He's fairly heavily owned, I'll admit, even despite the injury, and that did surprise me a tiny bit. He's owned in 38% of Yahoo leagues. He's available in a handful of mine. Played really well in his first game back. I know it was a thumb thing, so his conditioning was already solid, but if you need scoring and decent foul shooting and some assists and some 3-pointers, Freddie Van Fleet, not a bad flip up here, especially if you can wait to find out what's going on with Kyle Lowry. Van Fleet was good even when Lowry was healthy. When he's out, he gets to go real big. He can go take 20 shots out there. So keep an eye on that one. Potential streaming option for Toronto in a 4-game week. Bye-bye, Jeremy Lin. For Detroit, they're a favorable streaming team lately. They have these pockets of really good scheduling, kind of blended around a couple of miscellaneous off days. They had 4 games this last week. They've got 4 again. There is a 2 off day blend in there, Tuesday, Wednesday. So you could pick up, drop if you wanted to. They fit the mold for on and off your team in the fantasy playoffs. Wayne Ellington worth streaming. Luke Kennard has cooled off, not surprisingly, after his hot stretch. Langston Galloway's remained warm for the Red Hot Pistons. Ish Smith has played exceptionally well off the bench. A lot of options on that team. Chicago, blown out in Sacramento. They just didn't look like they were engaged at all in this ball game. Chicago, fairly uninteresting from a fantasy perspective. They're in the middle of a 4 games in 6 days stretch, so if you have any Bulls that are on the cusp, you're hanging on until after Wednesday, and then they have 1 game between that Washington game on Wednesday, and they go to Toronto on the 26th. They only play on the 23rd against Utah. Brutal. So one game over 5 days. If you're in any kind of jeopardy in your fantasy league, you got to cut bait on a Bull. Their schedule goes terrible. One game against a good team, yikes. Sacramento's a team that I've been assessing a little bit because, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, they have a pretty good streaming calendar this week, going Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. A unique schedule on some of the lower tide days, much like Charlotte. This game is not a great one. This box score from Sunday, not a great one to try to build your case for somebody because it was a blowout. So Harry Giles got 21 minutes instead of his usual 17 or 18. He's been a pretty nice per-minute guy. And if you need basically some defensive stats, some field goal percent, you're not going to take 14 shots most games, and therein lies the issue. You're going to need someone who's giving you just sort of a quick burst. And so I don't know if you can really trust Giles on a night-to-night basis. I mean, he might go out there, play 18 minutes, and take 4 shots. He's been pretty involved lately, though. I think I'd like to see a few more defensive stats. He's not going to hit any threes. He doesn't get to the foul line all that often if that's something that you're looking for. So it's limited right now. And that's the only name I can really come up with. You know, Nemanja Bjelica's fading hard with Marvin Bagley back in the mix. And then the rest of the key guys for the Kings are heavily owned. You know, nobody else plays enough minutes to be relevant in non-blowouts. It's Giles or nothing if you're trying to use that streaming slot. Atlanta, Dwayne Dedmon, he seems to be back and doing whatever it is that he was doing before to his top 60 clip. Alex Len, not surprisingly, has taken a hit. Trae Young has cooled off a tiny bit after that torrid run. John Collins has been okay. Nobody got their normal allotment of minutes in this one. Taurean Prince had been playing better. This was not one of his better games. Kent Bazemore saw 25 minutes. I mean, you put up 91 points, there's not going to be a whole lot there. And as I mentioned earlier, Atlanta, sort of a weird schedule this week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. They would fit it if you were trying to just drop a couple of off-day games in the mix. I'm not a huge fan of that. I'd rather not have to use multiple moves on the same roster slot if I'm streaming. You guys know I love the long stream, and 2 games over 3 days is just I'd rather have a guy longer. I like 3 and 4 or 4 and 6. Those are my moves lately. So not all that intrigued with Atlanta. If you're in a games cap format and you're looking for somebody on this team, it's the main guys. You know, it's Dedmon, it's Trae Young. Taurean Prince is creeping into the 9-category discussion. John Collins, I don't think I'd go any farther than that if you're using it as a games cap situation. Orlando's a mess this week. They're a 2-gamer. Nick Vucevic is a guy you use in a 2-game spot, and that's probably it. There's nobody else on this team that's consistently good enough to warrant a 2-game start. And I'd say, well, you know, it's not even a good 2 games. I mean, it's about as good as it gets, I guess. It's Wednesday, Friday. You know, if you wanted to, you could drop a Magic today. You could pick them back up. You could drop them again. It's a lot of moves to waste on one team. Then they go onto a really good schedule next week. The joke of it all. You may have some Magic floating around on your waiver wire on Monday of finals week. Keep an eye out. Houston beat Minnesota. Wolves are just down and out these days. Andrew Wiggins is playing again, but he doesn't look very good, and he hasn't for most of the year. Karl-Anthony Towns got roughed up a bit in this ballgame. Josh Okogie actually played really well. Sort of an odd twist. And something worth monitoring, by the way. Remember, Minnesota's another team, much like Atlanta, that has that sort of off-day games. If anybody gets ruled out, any sort of bonus players get ruled out, you could dive into the Wolves a little bit farther. What I'm hoping for is we see someone come back, like Jeff Teague makes a surprise appearance and he'd been dropped, or Derrick Rose makes a surprise appearance, or suddenly we get good news on Rob Covington for the first time in forever. But otherwise, schedule's not really very good. Houston, I mentioned right at the outset of the podcast, you know, you're looking for streaming options on this team because they do have a pretty good schedule this week with the every other day, or excuse me, the back-to-back tomorrow and Wednesday, and then they go Friday and Sunday as well. Atlanta, Memphis, New Orleans, 3 of their 4 games. They've got some pastry opponents mixed in there. Most of the main guys on Houston are owned. I would think Chris Paul, Clint Capella, Eric Gordon, James Harden, PJ Tucker. Those are probably guys that are on fantasy teams right now. So if you're looking at a potential streaming option, the guy would be Daniel House. He's played really well in his 2 games since signing that contract, finally getting his way out of the G League. We've been sort of relegated for a while. 14 points in this one. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he had 18 in their previous ball game. So there's a name to look at. How much can we trust him? I don't know. 35 minutes, 28 minutes. He's basically jumped Kenneth Fareed and Austin Rivers to soak up minutes at guard, and Houston's gone back to going smaller again. So put him on your calendar. I mean, if you have a guy that goes Monday and then has 3 games the rest of the week, you could flip him for Daniel House for 4 games the rest of the week. Just make sure you're not overloading any days. If you have a guy that, let's say you have a guy on your team that goes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. They played a night. You could dump him for Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. You make a move, you get 1 extra game. The question is, which guy do you want on your team more? And how much is that extra game worth? And how much do we trust Daniel House? He does have 6 3-pointers in his 2 games back. Shooting an unsustainably high percentage as well, though. Warning signs. Not much usage. Clippers hanging on to beat the Brooklyn Nets. That ball game got a lot closer than I think LA wanted. They were out by double digits for a while, and it was the usual suspects on all sides, with the exception, I guess, of a little Damari Carroll resurfacing. Brooklyn, we've already mentioned, they have a terrible schedule this week, so you're not even worried about any of the main or the non-main guys. And frankly, I'm not even worried about many of the main guys with Brooklyn. I think the only guy you start on this team this week is D'Angelo Russell. Karis LeVert played a little bit better. Spencer Dinwiddie did not. 2 for 16. That won't do it. He does get to the foul line a lot, and then he missed a bunch of them. Ouch. Rest of these guys, 2-game week? Nah, man. Gallinari, Patrick Beverley, Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams are the easy starts for the Clippers. Landry Shamet is a fantastic 3-point streamer right now. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 14 points, 10 assists. He's playing well these days. Problem is the Clippers' schedule is not very good this week. They had their little burst at the beginning of last week. They'll have another burst late in finals week. But between now and then, tough team to hang on to. Turn the clock back to Saturday. We'll try to hit the teams we haven't talked about so far. Boston, they're a team that we haven't paid much attention to because everybody on that team is owned, and there are way too many mouths to feed. Gordon Hayward is in the concussion protocol, so maybe you see a little bit more from guys like Marcus Smart, Marcus Morris, Jaylen Brown. You might get into the realm of those guys kind of creeping over the line from sort of useful to pretty useful. However, Boston's schedule, front and back loaded, but they don't play Thursday or Friday. So that's a team I think you're looking at if you have some move you want to make on Saturday for the back-to-back, and then they roll into Tuesday. So they do go 3 games in 4 days, and then their schedule gets clunky again. It's always something, isn't it? Memphis and Washington played a high-scoring game. Mike Conley's rolling along these days. Grizzlies now at least with 3 games this week instead of only 2. Again, wondering if anybody dumped their Grizz in your league. You could pick them up on Wednesday for 3 games in 4 days. Then their schedule, not bad, actually. They have 4 games next week as well, so they end up with 7 games over 12 days. It's not perfect, but it's also not awful, and it's certainly a lot better than the 2 games over 9 days that they had coming into this week. That's a tough one. I mean, who would you extend it to in that spot? The streaming is not outstanding. Avery Bradley, Joakim Noah, Delon Wright, Mike Conley, Jonas Valanciunas. Chandler Parsons had 16 points, but yeah, we're not buying into that nonsense. The Washington Wizards. We've had a big game from Thomas Bryant and then a decent game from Thomas Bryant. He looks like he's starting to push his way back into the mix a little bit. This was despite an okay game from Bobby Portis. Does this mean that there's a corner being turned? Every time we think that this is going to be more consistent, it doesn't turn out to be. They needed a bit more size with Jonas Valanciunas and Joakim Noah on the other side. But at the same time, say what you will about all of it, and, Brew and I had our little funny horseplay on the Friday show. Thomas Bryant is number 94 on the year in 9 category leagues. And a lot of that, obviously, is the fact that he's at 0.7 turnovers a game, 10 points, 5.5 rebounds, a block, half a three-pointer, 62% from the field, 82.5% at the free throw line. That's the real key. He's like Enes Kanter with a little bit less in the scoring and rebounding areas and a little bit more in the defensive stats. That's what you're looking for there. If you need percentages, he's a solid contributor. And then you got the other guys, Washington obviously with a pretty decent schedule. We've been down this road before. Phoenix, this was real. What a tank, man. This was impressive. New Orleans with a 3-point lead. Doesn't foul a team running down the court with 4 seconds left. Force them to shoot free throws. No chance to tie that way. Then try to call a timeout with no timeouts left, and they technical their way into a loss. Incredible stuff. Really incredible stuff from the New Orleans Pelicans to continue their tank fest. Frank Jackson had a really poor shooting game. Inefficient. He's taking a lot of shots, though, and so if you need, again, we were talking about how that was sort of a streaming option towards the end of last week. And that's why people were like, hey, look, New Orleans has a terrible schedule in the playoffs. Yeah, it's true. They go 3-3-3, but they did have this one little window where they went 3 games in 4 days, and then the rest of it is particularly terrible. So I don't even think I'd look at these guys for streaming. We're seeing a little bit more good stuff from Cheick Diallo. I'd keep an eye on him. Elfrid Payton has obviously been going nuts with nobody else alive and playing on this team. And then I don't think that I trust the other fringy players. Julius Randle had a 40-some-odd point game in their previous one. We're doing our reverse chronological deal, so we're not going to hit on that guy. Phoenix side, no Rashawn Holmes, no Tyler Johnson, no TJ Warren, DeAndre Ayton ejected, so they had to look elsewhere. And Dragan Bender logged a bunch of minutes. Devin Booker had 40 points in this one. Mikal Bridges continues to do his really nice low-usage stuff. DeAnthony Melton actually got some playing time. Kelly Oubre had 32. Josh Jackson had an efficient game for once. You guys know the deal with Phoenix at this point. And as mentioned before, that was their strong playoff grouping, much like New Orleans. They had 3 and 4 starting on Friday, running through today, Monday, and then their schedule gets terrible again. So not really a great spot to look for streaming options. And, in terms of the other guys, you kind of know the deal. Nothing changes there. Portland with a loss in San Antonio. Spurs led by Jakob Poeltl. I brought him up on the Friday show. He was poo-pooed ever so slightly. And then he came through with 10 blocks over the weekend. Rolling, baby. Rolling. LaMarcus Aldridge, Rudy Gay, DeMar DeRozan are the other guys you can actually trust on that side. For Portland, CJ McCollum hurt his knee. It looked really bad, and it turned out to be not quite as bad. But you might get a little bit out of Rodney Hood if you wanted to roll him out today and Wednesday. But then they only go one time over the next 4 days before having a better schedule on finals week. And I don't think they're rushing C.J. McCollum back. Portland is, they're not in fantastic shape from a, where they're actually going to be in the playoff standpoint. They're in the 4 seed. They could easily fall all the way down to the 8. But it'd be really tough for them to fall out of the playoffs. And so I think the goal here is, for most of these teams, avoid the Warriors in the first round. And hell, for the Blazers, maybe you almost want to fall into like the 6 hole. Then you play the 3 seed. You avoid the one at half of the bracket. Anyway, all that to say that if you're looking at a Portland stream, finals week is the better time. They go 4 games for 6 days of that week. And they have a bad pocket before then. But if you're looking for a quick twofer here, and then you go, you make a move today for someone going Monday, Wednesday, say Rodney Hood, and then another move for someone going 3 times Thursday through Sunday, 2 moves, maybe you could turn a 3-game week into a 5-game week. I don't know that I'd do that for any other spot, right? If you have a streamer that already has 4 games this week, I don't think I'm making 2 moves to turn it into a 5-game week just to squeeze 2 games out of Rodney Hood. It's not worth it. Jakob Poeltl is, to me, a must-own guy at this point, unless you have no need for field goal percent, rebounds, or defensive stats. And then Derek White, also you can throw into the mix on the Spurs side. Warriors have 5 games this week. I doubt many of these guys, if any of them, play all 5. The Warriors have just sort of quietly climbed their way into the 1 hole in the Western Conference. It's been a weird year for them. They haven't been super focused most of the season. They're a game up on the Nuggets. They can play without one of their mega stars, and they have been without KD. He'll probably come back at some point this week, maybe tonight. I'm guessing that guys like Draymond Green probably play 3 or 4 out of the 5. I think the only guy in the Warriors you might try to see go maybe all 5 would be Klay Thompson, because he just likes to. I mean, he's crazy like that. But it does open the door for, someone more toward like a Kevon Looney would be the example. And he had a terrible game against Oklahoma City, so I don't know that he's a great example of it. But if one guy is rotating in and out every night, if you can find the dude who's actually playing in all five, well, then it might be worthwhile. But there just isn't much there, Like Iguodala would be the answer, but he's probably going to rest a game. I don't know that I really screw around with the Warriors. I think you just have them if you already have them, and you hope they play 4 out of the 5 games. Oklahoma City does not have a good schedule this week, so I don't know that we need to do any deep diving over there. Cleveland loses in Dallas. Mavericks accidentally won a ball game. Maxi Kleber, 18-12 and a block. He looks like a new man after taking a couple of games off for injury. No Luka Doncic in this one, although I believe he's probable for the Mavericks' next ball game, which is tonight. And then they have 2, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. They have a really good schedule to start the week. So if you have some Mavs, trot them out there. Kleber's a good choice. Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Brunson, Tim Hardaway, Dwight Powell, Luka Doncic. I think any of those guys with the strength of schedule here, 4 games the first 6 days of the week, are solid choices in streaming context. From a 9-category standpoint, Kleber's kind of pushed his way back into the discussion. Jalen Brunson is very popcorny. He's sort of like a weird J.J. Barea type. Not my favorite 9-category guy, but if you need that stuff, you're stat hunting at this point in the year, remember. Tim Hardaway, similar situation. When Doncic is out, he obviously has a much bigger role. Dwight Powell, he's just rolling the rest of the way. For Cleveland, Kevin Love, we heard news that he's dealing with some sort of back contusion. We'll see how that situation plays itself out. Colin Sexton's been scoring a lot. A couple of times he actually did it on better percentages, but overall the Cavs remain a very difficult team to play anyone not named Kevin Love these days. Especially now that back-to-back and that 4 and 6 games ran out. They do have 4 games this week, but I don't think you're making a move to a Cavalier if you don't already have one on your team. It's not worth it. It's too much to spend to just get 4 games out of one of those guys. Indiana, we've already talked about. They have a really good schedule this week, but there are not that many options outside of the usual main grouping. I mean, this is why I don't much care for Corey Joseph. He had picket fences in this one. 1 point, 1 rebound, 1 assist, 1 steal. Tyreek Evans had 5 and 5. He just hasn't shown it this year. And then the main 6 guys are owned in your league, I would guess. Denver is a little bit more interesting. As I mentioned earlier in the program, they go 3 times Thursday through Sunday, and then they also have 4 games next week. So if you wanted to grab a nugget and hang on to them, that's a possibility as well. Like, let's say you're sitting on some Pistons, too. They only go 3 games next week. You rotate off of them this week to a nugget, and then you can just hang on for a while. That makes life pretty easy. They go 4 games next week. You don't even have to think about it. If somebody dropped, say, Gary Harris, if he's playing 25 to 30 minutes a game, it's not big stat lines, but he's gotten back into serviceable, barely serviceable range. I would venture to guess that Will Barton is owned. Murray and Millsap are definitely owned. Gary Harris is the one you've seen fall onto the waiver wires a little bit. Malik Beasley, there's a possibility he might be floating around out there. Same with Monty Morris. Now that Isaiah Thomas is out of the rotation, those guys become reasonable streaming options, even if they're not 9-category games cap types. We talked about Brooklyn already. Utah, they're a pretty straightforward team. They've got a good schedule each of the first 2 weeks of the fantasy playoffs. If you had a Jazz, you can just sit on them. If you don't, guys like Jay Crowder become useful in the stream. Ricky Rubio back from injury. He's useful again. Kyle Korver, if you just need 3-pointers, pretty reliable in that one statistical category. Otherwise, you're not going out of your way to go add these guys, but because of their schedule, because they go Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, because they have 4 games the first 6 days, if you had one that rolled over from last week, you can just keep rolling them. Make a move on Sunday if you need to. And finally, we'll flip the calendar back to Friday, make sure we didn't miss out on any teams. I think there were 1 or 2 that didn't go over the weekend, but I might be mistaken. Did anybody not play over the weekend? I'm losing my mind out here. No, that was everybody. Right? That was everybody. Yeah, we got him. Okay, reverse chronological lightning round done. Long streaming and short streaming discussions done. Told you about the blurbing stuff. Please rate and review the podcast. we will be back again tomorrow. That's how simple it is. I'm Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today. Half Size Tuesday coming up tomorrow's show. We'll talk to Mike Patria on Wednesday. Get you set up for the DFS contest. Thursday, Half Sizer. And Friday, live with Aaron Brewski. This will be our second to last live show of the year. Actually, it might be the last one. Look at the calendar here. No, second to last one. I got that right. I had a penultimate live show this week. Last one will be April 5th. Get my days right. Please do rate and review the show. I know I said it before, but I'll say it again. If you have a moment to rate and review the podcast, we definitely appreciate that. We're approaching 200, which is freaking crazy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please keep doing it. Have a wonderful Monday. Good luck. Don't make too many moves today. Remember, your best moves are saved for Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday of this week. Best streaming advice I think I can give to start the season or this semifinal week. This show, of course, is brought to you by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. Can't believe I almost forgot to mention our wonderful partners. HawaiianIsles.com is the website, at HI Kona Coffee. Play in the DFS contest with us on Wednesday. If you get second place, you win Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. But go check it out. Obviously, you go to Amazon.com. You can search for Hawaiian Isles. Buy them there. Again, it's at HI Kona Coffee on Twitter. Go say hello. It's not that hard. Just tweet at them. Say, hey, what's happening? And they will say it back. I know Glenn, our boy over there, was out in Japan for a while, I believe. I think he might be back in the States now. So welcome back, Glenn. If I got the dates right, I probably didn't because I got too many things banging around in my head. But again, that's Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company, a proud partner of all audio, visual, everything here at hoop-ball.com. So again, now, I wish you a wonderful Monday, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.